Hey, what's up guys? This is Cole with Tier 1 Transmissions. Today we're doing a build on an AS69 Stage 1. This is going to be a 19 plus. We'll go over some of the differences between the 1318 and the 19 pluses. There's really not that much, but mostly we're just going to be going over the build process and what exactly we put in this thing. So let's get started. So I'll polish my P1 sun gear, my P2 planet, and the sun gear shaft. And of course, I'll polish my stator. Polish the input shaft, and then we'll get everything cleaned off. Now I'll get all my gasket surfaces cleaned up, get everything brake cleaned, make sure all my holes are blown out, get this thing ready to start stacking. First things first, got my B1 clutch pack assembly. This is for 2nd and 6th. I always do an initial check on this without seals on the piston, just makes it easier to make adjustments if necessary. Now that I got my clearance where I want it, pull my piston back out, pop some seals on it, and put it back in. Get my B1 return spring compressed and get the snap ring in. The first difference between the earlies and the lates, the 1318s and the 19 pluses on Aisins, is going to be this bearing. The 19 pluses, they updated this bearing by adding 4 tabs, and it's a different bearing than the earlies. Start with my P2 ring gear, get my B1s around it, and then we'll keep loading gear train in this thing. The gear train on these Aisins doesn't change between earlies and lates, but the bearings do. One of the roller bearings on the sun gear shaft changes. It changes in thickness and count. The overall thickness remains the same because the shim on the lates is thinner. The earlies have a thicker shim with a different bearing. Lates are a thinner shim with a larger bearing. So this bearing has more rollers on the lates, and it's a different size than the early stuff. So we've installed our B1s and our gear train. Now we're going to install our B2s. Another thing between earlies and lates, the B2 clutch pack gets an additional friction in the 19 pluses. Not sure exactly why they did this. Really didn't see any B2 failures aside from the B2 pistons cracking, which is a known issue. So each one of those gets thoroughly inspected. The B2 piston gets installed in the extension housing, return spring compressed, snap ring installed, and we can get that on the trans. We'll get our parking assembly installed. Then we'll get the extension housing installed, making sure to give it all the love taps. The back half of these units don't change between stages, only between year ranges. Get one of our output shims and the output snap ring installed. And then we'll get our output seal on. It's not just flush or anything like that, it's a little bit below flush. We'll flip it over and start on our K3s. Got our K3 piston in the drum with the return spring and the balance piston. And we'll start loading clutches in it. Another difference, earlies and lates, is gonna be the K3s. K3s on 19 pluses, which is third, fifth, and reverse. It's a pretty common clutch pack to fail under high power situations. This one goes from a 5 count to a 6 count. They just increase the height of the drum to give you another friction. These plastic seals do have a problem with not sealing up. So one thing I always do is just make sure before I install everything else that they'll seal. Seal back in it and the backing plate, and it gives you something to grab onto. So now that I know it'll seal up, we'll get it installed, get our P1 ring gear in, and we'll start stacking the front gear train, the rest of it, and our K1 and K2 drum, we'll get that started. We got our P1 planet in the case. This is held in by 2 bolts and a snap ring. The snap rings look pretty menacing on these, but they're actually really light. Got our P1 sun gear installed. And then we'll install our Sonic's K2 hub and the K1 hub. The Sonic's K2 hub, as you can see, is much thicker than the stock hubs. Here I'm just getting my K1 drum set up. This is 1st through 4th. Again, I check these without seals on the pistons, makes it easier to set clearance. For the K2s, which is 4th, 5th, and 6th, we go to a 6 count on those instead of a 5 count, which is factory. Get my seals installed on the K1 drum. And get the K1 and K2 drums installed in the trans. This is actually a tool for 6L80s, but I've found if you tighten it way down, you can get it to fit on the AS69 drums pretty well. I get a new pump seal installed in my pump. Obviously checking gear depth. These we rarely see pump failures with. Get my gears lubed up and get my stator on. Get my seals installed on my stator and get the pump in the trans. Now that I got the pump torque down, can get the bell housing on. Take it nice and easy, torquing down my P1 Planet. And we'll get to air checking. These units usually air check very well, aside from the K3s, obviously. My input speed sensor installed, and we'll get started on the valve body. Not much to go over on the valve body side of things. These stay pretty stock. Get all my bolts torqued down and get them marked. And then we'll get the valve body installed in the trans. Get my wiring harness installed, all my connectors clipped in, the filter on, and we'll put the pan on. Now we got the pan on, we got all my case plugs in. Get it stamped and get it out the door. The last difference on these Aisins is the early stuff will have a PTO cover on one side of the transmission. The 2019 and ups will not have any PTO covers. They will obviously have the boss where it would be, but there's no hole to the inside of the trans. It's just casting. Thank you guys.